Hi, this is Nathan Pierce, and you're listening to another episode of REDtalks. And I have a guest with me today from WWT, Mark Wall. Mark, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Mark Wall. I'm a solutions architect for worldwide technology, and thanks for having me today, Nathan.
No, it's great to have you on board. The reason Mark is joining us so early on in the program is that we actually work a lot with you guys out there at WWT, and you got some really good insight of just what's going on, what level of adoption people are at with programmable infrastructure. And actually, I think it would be good to really share the kind of roadblocks people run into and just what we have to do to get around them, because they're not always technical. Sometimes they're cultural, and there's a lot going on. So yeah, I'm gonna sit back and put my feet up and drink my coffee, and you can tell us all about the real world out there, Mark. How's that sound?
Perfect. Sounds great. So yeah, and it's very interesting. You know, we're seeing a lot of our customers recently come down and really try to understand. You know, is it automation? Is it DevOps? Is it orchestration? Is it cloud? And you know, a lot of it has the same themes that we're seeing across the board. One thing that I like to say is that the idea of having silos of excellence are sort of going away. You're having these individual teams that are all moving towards the same goal, but there may be a group of storage individuals, there may be a group of networking individuals, there may be a group of the application developers, and really everybody kind of had their own piece of this overall puzzle. And really with this trend towards automation and DevOps, we're seeing those silos somewhat collapse, and really having those teams have to tear down those silos and kind of work together. So it's very interesting, and it's very cool to see people kind of take a step back, look at things from a bigger picture, and try to bring some of that together. So a lot of conversations across the board, across all different technologies, and really the cool thing is we're able to kind of try to get an idea of how to bring these teams together. And it's fun because some of these individuals have never met each other, working at the same company for 10 years, and they're literally right down the hall. So it's kind of a fun time to see that transition from I do this kind of thing here to now, hey, let's kind of work together. Let's leverage some of these new tools and technologies coming around to kind of get some of these things going. It's definitely a big change in the industry.
So you guys get to be like the internal United Nations within the silent departments.
Well, we try to be, and like you said, sometimes it's politics, sometimes it's different pieces of a solution that we're trying to bring together. But it's definitely fun, to say the least, and kind of bring and try to bridge those gaps. Particularly, you mentioned around programmability. This is a huge theme for us in customers just looking to dip their toe in the water. So how do I get started with some simple repetitive tasks that I do? If I'm creating, perfect example, if I'm creating VIPs, right? If I'm creating my VIPs for my applications, that's bread and butter. That's something that the operations guys do day in and day out. And they say, hey, how do I maybe automate just a simple task of creating this? So my application developer can go in and check a box, put in a couple servers, right? Or maybe those are automatically spun up, and all of that's sort of automated. And we're seeing a lot of interest in how do I get started? What are those first couple small steps to get me on kind of that road moving forward? So very interesting times.
Would it be fair to say that I think a lot of people feel like they're under pressure to go straight from using the GUI and the CLI to a fully autonomous system? And they think that they need to do that on day one, and that's kind of terrifying to them. And in reality, actually, it's operationally risky to put that much into the automation straight up. You need to kind of get comfortable with each step. So would that be a fair kind of comment? Oh,
absolutely, yeah. And we're definitely seeing that customers, come to us and say, hey, we're getting this new cloud first strategy or private cloud strategy, or everything's got to be automated strategy, and they're coming out both guns ready to go. Let's get this done. But really, to your point, a lot of people miss the idea of, hey, let's start small. Let's pick some simple repetitive tasks that we can sort of start, prove out, and then add the next piece. My colleague Joel King always says, two things I want to do. Let's make it dumb as a hammer, right? Make sure anybody can consume it and it's simple, but also micro solution based. Let's not boil the ocean. Let's pick one or two things, get some success, and get some momentum using that, and then tie these solutions in together. So absolutely, the pressure is there, and I think the best advice that we've seen is really take small sections, work on those, and use that to be able to move forward.
So your traditional NetOps kind of person they don't have to integrate on day one because that is the scary change. It's handing the keys over to the Ferrari to a completely different team. But they can automate the things they do themselves, get comfortable with that process of automation. So something they would normally type individual command on a CLI, well, maybe I can use a REST API on that same product and actually just send a payload that does all that for me. So I've eliminated that whole process of typing each individual commands, which I could make a mistake on, or which is time consuming, lends itself to operational risk. So that first step, I think, is actually just making the traditional NetOps person far more operationally efficient. And then once comfortable with that, once comfortable with debugging practices and how to understand and interpret the logs of those operations, only then are you ready for the next phase, the second phase of orchestration, which is where you start saying, well, what, I'm so happy with this script and the way this automates. It's pretty solid. I'm now going to give the commands to run it to the person using my orchestrator. And even that orchestrator might be within the infrastructure team still, or it might be outside of the infrastructure team. But at least you've got comfortable with that initial process. I mean, that's kind of what I see. Does that replicate your world?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we're seeing that, sometimes teams sort of own the solution end to end, or sometimes teams have to work together to where, myself is, from a networking standpoint, may have to, hand over, here's kind of the task that I need to do, put it as part of this maybe, broader orchestration system. But what we're really trying to do is encourage folks, to your point, and we're seeing a lot of folks already doing this, to develop some of these, tasks and workflows, these simple scenarios, sort of in-house by myself, using simple tools. We're live, so and I'm actually in my vice president's office right now, and he's kind of giving me the look, so he's messing with me, I'm sure.
I was looking in the background trying to work out if that was your football up there.
Yeah, no, this is definitely his. This is all the St. Louis stuff. But yeah, so it's really folks kind of taking those, and we have a theme too. It's who moved my cheese, right? So if I can do a certain task via the command line, why don't I take that and I just take a step back and I say, hey, can I do this from the API from your standpoint? It's not unlike, hey, I have a terrible golf swing, right? But I'm gonna work with somebody and I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? Give this a try. Just give me an honest hour of your time. Work on your shoulders, line things up, right? And you'll hit it 20 yards further every single time. And I think that's really kind of the idea that we're seeing folks that are getting successful is, what, you've done things the same way, but just give this an honest try and really let me help show you and understand the potential of doing things in a programmatic way, because it's really going to help you in the long run. I mean, the biggest risk that we see is human error, right? So if I'm on the command line and I'm typing away and I'm really busy, or I'm getting phone calls and things, I may typo something. And as we all know, when you're in the networking or sort of that type of space, a single typo can be very catastrophic. So leveraging some sort of programmatic approach not only obviously saves time, right, in the long run, but it also ensures compliance, predictability, and making sure that you're very consistent in whatever you're doing. And I think even to that point, being consistent and reducing that risk is a win just for management and leadership, in addition to just the time to market and the operational savings as well.
Totally. An example, I don't know why I just remembered this one now. We're always looking for metaphors to explain the kind of benefit of this. But I remember when my local pizza joint, this is back when I lived in England still, they added this feature where I could just hit a button that said reorder last order. Mm-hmm. That that saved me from a lot of mistakes. I was actually really excited about that feature, and I just realized that that's actually the perfect metaphor for service templates. And we talk about a lot these days of how, can we take out having to do every step again every time, whereas now I can just hit this button on my phone and magic, pizza arrives at my door. Like, actually, that's the kind of thing we need to bring to operations, not just for ordering fast food, but for anything, maybe for ordering salads as well. I could do with some of that instead of just pizzas. But yeah, we can bring this same kind of thing to all of our life. And I never realized actually that was basically a service template. That's like an OpenStack heat template or an F5's IAPS or something like that. Like that same kind of concept that we're trying to achieve. Ease of consuming resources.
Yep. And I have another example as well. Internally, we do a lot of labs and hands-on trainings. And I was always one to, spin up the VMs, one by one, go ahead and reset them, do everything manually. And to be fair, I was in the same boat as a lot of where folks are now. Every other team in that leverages our lab environment has some sort of automation, whether it's something like Qual systems, whether it's some areas of OpenStack with tools on top of it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to start small, and I'm going to start with the use case that says, hey, I want to rebuild my lab environment. It's 20 student pods, and I'm going to use Ansible in this case, right, to go ahead and reinstantiate, set everything up, license everything, and do all that. And I think really having that ability to say, hey, I want to change from this type of class to this type of class and reset and make it clean. It went from literally 2 entire days of rebuilding and licensing, and now it takes me about an hour and 20 minutes for Ansible to run through, build all the VMs, go through, clean everything up. And that way, that not only saved my time, but now I can actually, to your point of consumption, I can actually hand that over to our other team members and say, hey, I know you know how to teach this class, but you're unfamiliar with the lab environment. I've went ahead and we figured out a way to programmatically reset and reinstantiate this. And that really drives adoption and consumption of this, to our customers and to fellow, engineers throughout the organization. So it's definitely something that I think is valuable really in any area of what you're looking at, whether it's some big giant business application, or maybe it's just some simple reporting, or maybe even a simple backup strategy. I think there's an opportunity for folks to really pick something, try to figure out how to leverage APIs, how to leverage certain programmatic approaches, and really get some success and some confidence, and then sort of move down that road.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I like the way you put that there. We've got taking these early steps. There's a term we use internally all the time, and it's about creating this super NetOps. So this isn't a process of leaving behind all the ways that we used to do things. All those things still need to be done. We still need security policies implemented. We still need connectivity. So we still need firewalls configured up. We just need to do them without manual process in the way. So it's not like our organizations are turning our backs on our existing kind of customer that we work with. No, it's about actually going on a journey with them, taking them from the traditional way, the traditional NetOps definition, to this super NetOps user that can really enable them work with continuous deployment tool chains and developers, and able to really speak that language of REST APIs, understanding what a resource is versus a collection. Those kind of things. So we're kind of all going on a journey together, really, isn't it? It's not a shift. It's an expansion of the market of what infrastructure has to address now that it is more programmable.
Oh, definitely. And I think you make a good point. It's not trying to completely shift, from what we're seeing and where customers are sort of trying to go. It's not from, hey, you have to be a network command line guy to now you have to be a full-blown developer and understand all of this. It's how do I sort of move in that direction and meet halfway? You made a point earlier about, sometimes it's internalized to where maybe the network team has their own automation. But in some organizations, and even internally here at Worldwide, I can develop some of the networking and the application delivery workflows, and I can actually help hand those off to other teams. We have a web development, our portal essentially team that does, programmatic approaches to essentially everything. So I basically say, here's kind of my API calls that I need to do. go ahead and fit it in your web portal development. And that's really the important thing, is that I was in the same boat as most customers. I mean, I struggled with, what's an API? What'd you call me? What REST? I'm not too tired, right? What are you talking about? So it was very interesting for me to sort of try to pick these up and learn these things, but then realize, hey, I don't have to be an expert. I don't have to know everything. I have to be able to go from where I'm at, understand how to the ability to take some of these calls, develop some kind of simple workflows, but then be able to interface with other team members. Me being the SME on the networking or the application delivery side, I essentially have to help them understand the API structure. Here's a couple pieces that they need to do, and now I can integrate it into an overall solution. And that's where we're really trying to have conversations with people and saying, hey, you don't need to be an expert, right? You need to start moving in that direction. I think it's really going to help you. But by no means is it you got to go from 0 to hero immediately. It's, what's step 1, step 2, step 3, just to be part of that overall solution. And I think you hit it spot on there.
That's cool, man. That's good to get that validation from someone out there in the field as well. You mentioned, everyone has a beginning in this, right? And no one's born fluent in REST APIs. So got any pro tips for anyone? How did you start? Did you just decide, you know what, I'm going to sit down and read all the O'Reilly books on Python? Like what was your starting point? Any pro tips for anyone out there thinking, you know what, today's my last day of being bound to the mouse?
So I would say it really came down to there was a few scenarios, and as I mentioned, internally we use a lot of systems like Qualis system is our back-end lab management system. It's very good for a lot of things, but I said, you know what, me being a little bit of a rebel, I'd rather do things in a more programmatic way, because that's where the industry's going. So I said, you know what, I'm going to take a scenario where I have my load balancer, right? And I want to just do something very simple that customers, I think, is going to be coming up. I want to create a VIP, right, that I mentioned. This is my very first dive into this. And I said, how do I do this? So I literally went into the GUI and I did it. And I kind of mapped out all the steps, right? It's only a handful of steps. I create kind of the server, I create the pool, and I create the VIP, right? And then I said, okay, that was pretty easy. Let me do it in the command line. So I went into the command line and I created, and I kind of mapped those out. And I said, okay, that's, they're somewhat consistent. And then I said, how do I get started leveraging, this in a programmatic way via, the API? So, all APIs are not created equal, right? This happened to be an F5 in this instance, and I said, why don't I look at the documentation and start playing around with a couple things? But the great thing that I found out is that, on F5, for example, is that the structure of how the command line and even the GUI kind of maps directly to how the API call is. So what I said was, okay, if I make a workflow, I said, what are the steps that I need to do? I need to create a node, I need to create a pool, I need to add the node to the pool, and I need to create the VIP. And I literally wrote those out, and I said, how do I do it in the GUI? How do I do it in the command line? And then I said, how do I do it in the API? The great thing is it could all match up one-to-one. And that was the important thing, was that, hey, if I did this actual command line command, this is the actual API call that I need to do, and it kind of matches up very easily. So after I used curl, very simple sort of command line way to do it, I started using Postman. And I realized very quickly, Postman is awesome. If anybody hasn't used Postman, it is absolutely the way to go, and it's free, which is awesome. So I could take Postman and I could save some of these calls, but I could also query it. I could also do a query on the F5, and it kind of helped me out. So I said, I'm not really sure how to create a VIP in the API. The directions are a little vague. Why don't I create it in the GUI? And then why don't I do a get on the F5, and it'll spit back the actual API structure and what I actually need to do to submit it. And so that's really how I kind of learned. I started with a very simple sort of real world scenario that I found relevant, that I knew inside and out from a traditional command line and a GUI structure. And I just kind of tried to map those all side by side, and it worked out very, very well. After I started getting familiar with that, I started leveraging tools like Ansible and a few others to sort of try to automate it. But really those first steps were understand it in the GUI, understand it in the command line, and then take those examples and try to map it to an API call.
So Mark, you're clearly the person who should teach people how to do this. I'm clearly not, because so the way I started was I didn't map any process. I didn't think through or write down what I was going to achieve. I literally just started poking at the REST API to see what it did. Kind of like a child would poke at a hornet's nest until it got stung. That was my approach. That's how I got started. And yes, I got stung a few times. I did this in my lab, no production environments. It's fine.
Yeah.
But I learned really quickly. There was a lot of, I learned through enabling verbose debug mode. That's how I learned the API. Whenever I did something wrong, it would spew out at me exactly how wrong I was. And yeah, no, your approach is better. I recommend customers out there follow the Mark Wall approach of thinking through what you're going to do and working through each step of that. That sounds like a much more sound way of not getting into trouble.
Well, you know what? Whatever works, right? And I'm usually one to sort of poke, but I didn't even know enough on how to poke it. So I like the stare and compare. Here's the command line, here's this, and try to map it up. But honestly, whatever works, I think for most people, as long as you're getting something out of it and you're learning what not to do, that's just as important, right? At the end of the day. So.
Well, at least there's a fallback career for me of testing electric fences, because I'm the kind of guy who tests it by grabbing the fence. So on that note, Mark, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate your insight and some really valuable ideas there, and just even how to look at this thing differently. But yeah, I guess what I'd take away from a lot of that is the fact that everyone's in the same boat. We're all at the beginning. I mean, there's an expectation that we hit this autonomous system at the end, but don't even be thinking at that process yet. I mean, some organizations have thousands of developers on hand that just say, show me your API documentation and I don't need to talk to you ever again. But then the majority of us, we don't have that resource. Actually, we need to start with what's capable and within our domains and with our realms first. And then once we get a better understanding by using those APIs and by learning how to debug them and troubleshooting them, then we can make that next step into working with other teams and their deployment tools and systems. So I appreciate you sharing that with us all. And I hope I can speak to you again in a future episode. You've clearly got a lot of insight to share with us.
Oh, definitely, yeah, and I appreciate you having me. Definitely be great to join you guys again.
Okay, so that's the end of another episode there. You've been listening to Mark Wall from WWT, that's the other guy, and Nathan Pierce from F5 Networks. This has been REDtalks, Ranting Engineers on DevOps. Thanks for listening.
Thanks.